come to me and said, tell me, pointed towards Candy, said her husband's in prison. I said, well, if she wants me to know anything about it, she'll talk to me about it. Until then, it's none of my business. But one day Candy came and said, hold it close, Candy. One day Candy came and said, Brother Rager, would you go to the prison? And Tony said he got saved. Would you go to the prison? I said, I sure will. It took me 3 months to get clear. I don't know who was that worse, Tony or me, but anyway, it took me 3 months. But anyway, I met Tony Mack. I was there for 5 hours, first 15 minutes. We was introducing ourselves. I went with Candy's brother, Terry Ellison, and for the next 4 hours and 45 minutes, all Tony wanted to talk about was the Lord Jesus Christ. And I knew that he was saved. That very day, I fell in love with that man. Because you see, if we would be honest, there's a lot of us here today that was going down the wrong road also. And we could have ended up in the very same place. And I love that man with all my heart. Still love him. But he went on now, May the 30th, he's gone on to be with the Lord. He graduated from this life into life eternal. And he is in heaven today rejoicing and having a ball. And we down here, we still got our journey to go. But today, we have the privilege of his wife being with us and sharing with us. So right now, if you give her a hand, I want Candy to come up.
Thank you guys for having me here today. Originally, my husband was scheduled to come and speak to you guys. And because he went home to be with the Lord, they asked me if I wanted to still come. And, you know, I told God that if he opened the door for me to step through, that I would step through it. And for those of you that don't know me, standing up in front of a crowd of people at a church was a really, really hard thing. There's been a lot of prayer, and God's really brought me a long way. This is not something that's not my comfort zone. Tony, on the other hand, as you could see, oh my gosh, God just gave him a gift and an ability to speak to people, and he was never, ever at a loss for words. And I would just sit after he got saved and listen to the way that he would minister to someone that called on the phone, a truck driver. And I was still amazed. I was just at how God took him and changed him. He spent 15 years of our married life in prison. We got married when I was 16. He was 17 years old. He went to prison when our kids were probably 5 and 6 years old, just little bitty kids. He had a really bad reputation. Tony had a drug problem. When we got married, he was an alcoholic, he was a drug addict, but I just didn't really realize how bad he was until we were married. And I always thought that I could help him change that. But I didn't realize it was going to take, oh my gosh, over 15 years, 20 years for God to make that change in him. But for 15 years, he went to prison for second-degree murder. I so encourage you, if you have not heard his testimony, I really encourage you to get a copy. There's probably some, I don't know if there's any free ones here today or not, but if not, I have some in the car. But I really encourage you to get a copy of his testimony. His testimony just really lives on. And it's not who Tony was, it's the power of what God did with someone who had gone that far. I mean, he really, some people would call him the worst of the worst. He had a really bad reputation. He was a really big guy, even in prison. I mean, nobody would mess with Tony Mack. And he had drugs in prison. And that's one thing about, I mean, God, I think that's why the testimony is so amazing to so many people, because when you hear where he was, and God just reached down and changed him, and took somebody that was convicted of second-degree murder, and allowed that person, he was a vessel, he was a willing vessel, and God, who but God? Who but God? That's why, because who but God could do that? In Oklahoma, he was Senate pastor probably 4 years at the state capitol in Oklahoma. You know, who but God could do that with someone of his reputation? God is just able to take, and I know, does anybody in here know anybody that's in prison, have a family member in prison? Usually, when you go to churches back in the old day, you would not see one hand raised. God took us, after Tony was saved, he took us all over the United States of America. Tony giving his testimony. And you would ask in a church, North Carolina, Tennessee, no matter where we were at, when he would say, is anybody in here related or know somebody that's in prison, you should have saw the hands go up. There's always hurting people. And even if your loved one's not in prison, maybe they're just out there in the world, our story is a story of hope, because it shows you what God can really do in a person's life. And I prayed for a lot of years for that man. I had a lot of time traveling back and forth to prison to pray for Tony Mack. And God is just, well, he took a tragedy in my life, and he used that to transform my husband's life. My mom in this earth was my rock. She was an amazing woman. Tony wouldn't have been her choice for me. He certainly wasn't my dad's choice for me. My dad wouldn't even come to our wedding. My dad loves that man so much today after Tony got saved. My dad would call and check on him. That's the transformation that took place in Tony's life. When he sold out to God, he sold out to God. But my mom, she was just, I loved her so much. I was Tony's source of strength before God. It's just the way it was. I was his source of strength. He counted on me, he relied on me, I was his everything. And when my mom died, I was just really, really devastated. It was a real hard time for me. And Tony was being so bad in prison. You'd think being in prison was bad enough, but it wasn't. You can get locked up inside prison. I was always getting phone calls from people in prison, his cellmates or something, saying, Candy, don't come this weekend. Tony's in lockup because he'd get into an altercation with somebody or even a guard. I mean, that's how bad and how wild his life was. And after Mom passed away, he got put in an underground prison, maximum security in the state of Oklahoma, and I didn't see him for a really long time. He wasn't there for me. He couldn't wrap his arms around me. He couldn't console me. You know, I just felt really alone. And one of our kids, we had 2 daughters. One of our daughters had started going down the wrong path, and it was all during this period. I never in my wildest thoughts, I mean, my kids were in church, they knew who God was. I preached to them about drugs and alcohol from the time they were old enough to hear what I said because of the life that their dad had lived. And you would think that just seeing where their dad was enough for them. But one of the girls had started messing up. They were both resentful and rebellious. saw their dad wasn't changing, and I continued to stick by him. Their whole life, every weekend, instead of being at the soccer field or the skating rink or the movie theater, they were being drugged with their mom to prison for their dad. That was their life. That was their childhood when they were kids. They grew up in a prison yard. During that time, when I finally did get to go see Tony, I think he, for the first time in his life, saw how much everything had taken a toll on me. And I don't remember it today, but he said that I told him. I do remember it's like I just had nothing left. It's like I had no more strength in me. It's like it was all, I just didn't have anymore. I was weary, I was tired. And he saw that in me, I think, for the first time in our whole married life. And he said that I said, you know, again, Tony, please give your life to Jesus. That's something that I always, you know, I lifted up the name of God to Tony always. And I had even forgotten one time, he got up and gave his testimony. His testimony, that man, I wish you could have met him. He could have stood up here for a year telling about his life and always told a different story. I mean, he just had all this in his head. But one time when he was giving his testimony, he talked about how I was talking about the love of God and how God was before everything else in my life. And God was before him. Because had it not been for God, I wouldn't have my family. I wouldn't have anything. And he took my Bible and he put it in the trash. And he said, he remembered me going over and just taking my Bible out of the trash and wiping it off. I had forgotten that, but God just would open windows for me to minister to him. And even when you think your family member is not hearing what you're saying, if you're not beating them over the head with it, you have to do it in love. They're hearing what you're saying. You're planting that seed. I just encourage you to keep on encouraging them. I encourage you to keep being that love and that example to your family member. But during that time, he said, I told him, please give Jesus your heart, and that I don't know how much longer I can do this. And I guess it just, that and God, I remember getting down on my knees one night by my bed, and I cried out to God, you know, this word, oh my gosh, it really is a fountain of treasure. It will get us through any trial that we have to go through. There were some scriptures that really helped me. I love the scriptures on faith. And the scripture about trial, where God tells us in this world we're going to have trial and tribulation, but to be a good cheer because he's overcome the world. One of my favorite scriptures always, ever, was when a woman had the issue of blood, and she had just the faith that it took. She knew that if she should just get to God and just touch the hem of his garment, just touch the hem of Jesus' garment, she'd be made whole. She'd be made well. When I was a little bitty girl, that story spoke volumes to me. You know what? We might not touch the physical realm of his garment today, but all we have to do is just lift up our heart and our prayers to God. You're touching the hem of his garment.
Amen.
And he will. He carries us through. He just carries us through. And one night, I got down on my bed at this time in my life. I mean, I probably didn't weigh 90 pounds. And I got down on my knees by my bed and I said, Lord, I quoted the scripture. I told him, Lord, you said in your word, if I had the faith of a mustard seed, that I could say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it would be moved. And Lord, you said, if I believed and had that faith of a mustard seed, that nothing would be impossible for me. Nothing would be impossible. That's God's word. And I just cried out to him with my whole heart. I mean, with my whole heart. I wept wholeheartedly to God that night on my knees. And within 3 or 4 months, you know what? God moved my mountain. And he saved my husband. And after Tony was saved, he spent 4 more years in prison. He was growing in the Lord. Our visits after that became so much sweeter. The girls saw that their dad was saved. I love to share. We have a prison ministry to this day. We have a prison ministry. That's God. God opened doors when Tony got out of prison. We started the prison ministry. We have 5 or 6, I need to sit down and name them off, prisons that we go to once a month on a regular basis. And I love to share in the prisons because I feel like I have more to offer them, because I feel like we've walked in their shoes. But just because you're not in prison, especially to the men and the women, I tell them, you know what, we go to the ladies, Eddie Warrior, we go to the women's prison. They are awesome. Those women are so hungry for God. That chapel, I think it holds 180 people, and it is always full. And sometimes, sadly enough, we have to turn women away because when the chairs are full, the fire code says no, and you can't let any more come in. They literally run to the chapel. What a blessing that is. Those women are on fire for God. But I love to share with them because I want them to know, gosh, look what God did for us in our lives. Look what God took and did with Tony Mack. He so funny. He had a really bad accident. This part's not funny. It changed our lives forever. In 2006, he had a really bad accident on his way to prison. And he spent 18 days in the hospital. It busted him really, really bad. Really, really, really bad. He was broken. His back, he had pins and rods in his legs, his pelvis. He was just crushed. He was crushed. But he continued to go. He continued to go. But I forgot where I was going. After the accident, he continued to go. We went to, just anywhere God called, we went. But y'all forgive me. I'm really, really broken inside now. Right after his accident, he got a phone call. He was still laying in his bed at home. He really couldn't even get up. He got a phone call from Representative Sue Tibbs at the state of Oklahoma. She was representative for the state capitol, wanting to know if she could come out and if he would give her some input. They were trying to figure out how to make the recidivism better after people got out of prison, how to make the prisons better. And so who but better to call, they thought, than Tony Mack. For some reason, God just took him. He was asked to go to Washington, D.C. and speak at a panel there. This is God. This is God. After he was saved, God gave him wisdom that he never had before, I promise. I promise. God just transformed him. Even his, and I always say it wrong, countenance. I hope I said it right that time. Tony's always correcting me. Even his face. He would just look so tired and so ragged and so worn when he wasn't living for Christ. And after God saved him, he just got this peace that just filled him. And he just even looked different. And God gave him wisdom. But this lady came to our house. He said, I just had an accident, but you're welcome to come. We have a little bitty humble abode. And she came, and we got a kitchen chair, and she sat at the foot of his bed, and she got a lot of information from him. But through their relationship, he would go to the Capitol, and he would give luncheons and stuff, but she was just a little old bitty thing. She wasn't that big around, and she was probably in her 70s. She was an amazing woman who loved the Lord, and she wouldn't back up for anybody or anything. She did a lot of things in the state of Oklahoma, pushed for a lot of things for the prison system. Some of them were passed and some of them weren't, but she passed away, and they asked Tony Mack to come and speak at her service. And, what an honor that was. And he went and he spoke at her service. He was funny. If you get the CD or the DVD, and yes, I'm prejudiced, but he was funny. He will make you laugh. He would make you cry. And you know the amazing thing about that is now I'm still getting phone calls. People are still hearing his CDs that Gary Rayburn. We came to Illinois and how this all got started over here at Rig Ministries. Gary wasn't there then, Gary and Linda Rayburn. We were speaking at Brother Kenny's church. He was preaching out here at Springerton, and Sister Rita, and they'd asked us to come. This is how God took this and he just grew it into just this huge, huge thing. They had asked us to come. We were speaking. Gary had a son that came. He called him up. He said, Dad, Gary had a CD ministry where he'd take people's testimonies and he'd put them in truck stops and people would pick them up. And Gary's son said, Dad, you got to come hear this guy's testimony. So Gary came on over, and he heard Tony speak. There was a rehab group there. He had several groups there that night. And Gary said, Brother, he said, can I take your testimony and use it? And Tony told him, absolutely, that's not my testimony. That belongs to God. All we have is God's. And Gary started duplicating that testimony. And I mean, we still today get phone calls. I still have his phone turned on. We still get phone calls of people that's picked up his CD, don't know, but they still call. And I try to call them back and let them know, but they're still being blessed. After he passed away, there was one that we baptized in church a week later because he went home and listened to Tony's DVD, watched it on TV, and gave his life to the Lord. And we baptized him a week later in our church. God is still moving. He's still using it. I'm so thankful for who God is and what he does in our lives. But you know what? God has a purpose for each and every one of you sitting out there. Each and every one of you, God has a purpose and a work and a will in your life to do. And it's not always the same. Sometimes it just might be being a better father. Maybe it's being a mentor to a young person. You know, there's a purpose for every one of us if we're just willing to be that vessel. But after he got saved, I just can't tell you how God changed his life. And people would come up to me and they'd say, Candy, how'd you do it all those years before he was saved? It was a pretty wild life. And you know, all I could tell them is, how do you walk away from someone you love? Nobody's special. I absolutely am nobody special. God's got a long way to go with me too. But how do you walk away from somebody you love? But I know that he hears our prayers. And I know he answers prayers. And I'm so, so, so thankful. Even the worst things in our life, like the loss of my mom, he can use to make good come from it. I don't understand. I don't understand why. When I look at the two of us, when it was Tony that God used so mightily, I don't understand why. I don't understand why he's the one that's not here today. But I know that God is God and that there's a reason for everything. And I know that if I just surrender my whole heart and I do what God calls me to do, whatever it is, maybe if it's just continuing to go to the prisons, that God's never going to leave me, he's never going to forsake me. And he's going to see me through all this. And I believe that Tony's testimony, God's testimony, will continue to live on. And I'm just so thankful for the years that we had. He served 15 years in prison. And when he got out of prison, he spent 15 years living with me and his family. And during that 15 years, we had a beautiful, 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 blessed life. God took us all over the United States of America. We saw the Smoky Mountains in Tennessee. We saw Clingmanstone in North Carolina. We've seen Crater Mountain, Crater Lake. I mean, God has just taken us on this tremendous, tremendous dance, this tremendous, tremendous journey. And I'm so thankful. Someone sent me a text, and they said, you know, Tony got 30 years sentence when he went to prison. It was a 30-year sentence. He served 15 and was free. And someone said, you know, Tony Mack spent 15 years in prison, and most of it wasn't serving the Lord. And he spent 15 years in free life serving the Lord. And he said 30 years time served. And it just hit me like a ton of rocks. But I know if we could just get one little glimpse, just one. No, you don't know how. I've said, Lord, if I could just have one little glimpse into heaven. And when I was talking to God, and this was for someone else, we had a preacher in Tennessee and his wife, about 10 years younger than us. His wife passed away, I found out about 3 weeks after Tony. And I texted him and I told him how sorry I was, because I knew what his heart was feeling. And he started texting me back. And I could tell he's really, really struggling in his text messages. And I told him, Tony, ironically his name is Tony. I said, Tony, if we could just get one little minute peek into heaven for just a few seconds and see their faces. And when I, in my spirit, thought that, God just gave me a little peek in my heart and in my mind of Tony's smile. And I know that he's not hurting anymore. His body was so broken, he was getting so weary. And it does help to an extent. It does help. I try to always just take that and hang on to it, just that glimpse of what he's feeling. I know that it's still going to be a journey. My heart is still broken, but I know that with God's help, I'm going to walk through this. And I just encourage each one of you, if you have someone in your life, especially, you men, you're the leader of your families. You're the head of your house. And you have a big responsibility in your families. I just encourage you to keep praying for your families, to be that example that God called you to be. And just don't lose heart. Just get in that Word. Search His Word and hang on to His hidden treasure, because that's what it is, a treasure. When Tony put down his shank in prison, when I went to pick him up, another God thing, it wasn't his release date, but I went to pick him up from prison. God actually released him on our anniversary, which was January 3rd. That was a God thing. Everything, I could stand up here and tell you story after story after story of just, that that's a God thing, that it is ordained by God, everything, so many things. But when I went to pick him up from prison, the chaplain came out and he sat down with me while Tony was, all the paperwork and everything was going on, and he said, Tony Mack had two reputations. There was the bad reputation, where he was always in fights. He had homemade knives buried all over the yard. And it's a big thing. People get stabbed in prison every day. That was my prayer, because I was always afraid because of who he was and the reputation and the lifestyle that he lived in prison. I prayed my whole heart out for that man because I figured one day he was going to get stabbed and I was going to get a phone call. I'm serious. And I prayed, Lord, just save him. I never dreamed when I prayed for God to save him. I just prayed, God save him so that before he dies, I'll know where he's at and I can be okay. I never, even in my wildest expectations, saw God didn't just save him, God used him. There was a time in our life when I wouldn't even look at tomorrow. He had a 30-year sentence. I took it one day at a time because it was just too much for me to focus on. I couldn't look at 30 years when he went to prison. Our kids were just little bitty. I took it one day at a time, but half the time in my heart, I didn't believe he was even going to come home. And my prayer was, save him, Lord, before he dies. And when I went to get him, the chaplain came out and he said, there was two reputations to Tony Mack. There was the bad reputation when all the guys followed him across the yard, whether it be drugs, whether it's in fights, wherever it was, he said. And then there's the second reputation. When he put down that shank, that homemade knife, and he picked up this sword, and he walked across the yard boldly. He was bold. My husband, I was kind of scared sometimes because you never knew what was going to come out of his mouth. At church, it didn't matter. He just was who he was. He said it like he was. He was a little rough around the edges. He did 15 years in prison. What do you expect? But he said it like he thought it was. But when he picked up this sword and he carried it boldly across that prison yard, the chaplain told me, man after man after man watched him in his walk, gave their life to the Lord because of the new Us as individuals, even me as an individual, I try to be bolder. I'm not quite as bold as he was. Sometimes we would go to restaurants, he was telling everybody, anywhere we go, about his Jesus. We'd go to a restaurant, it didn't matter. He wanted to tell them about his Jesus. I'd be like, but baby, can you at least wait till they bring us our food? But that's who he was. And God used him because of that. And I'm trying to take lessons from that. I'm not as bold as he was. But thank you guys so much for having me. God bless y'all.